Radio, a podcast produced by Winding Trails Media, for writers, by writers. The following podcast was recorded in front of a live audience with live audience participation at the Writers in the Park 2016 Writers Conference given in St. Louis. Writers, agents, and publishers, for the first time since the Gutenberg Press, find themselves lost in a maze of mystery as technology alters the shape of the publishing industry. Searching for Answers is a group of writers throwing pop culture, writing, and publishing into a crucible of clarity, passion, and humor. This group is the Right Pack. Welcome back to Right Pack Radio. This is your host and producer, David Allen Lucas, president of St. Louis Writers Guild, president of Winding Trails Media, and currently working on audio plays and doing other crazy writing. And with me today is...
I'm Jennifer Stolzer. I'm a children's book author and illustrator. I have a fantasy book coming out next year in 2017 called Threadcaster. You can find out more about that and watch my self-publishing journey at threadcaster.com. That's thread like string and caster like magic.
And you're going to be at Archon as well.
I am going to be at Archon. I won't have Threadcaster there with me, unfortunately. 2017, Archon is before then. But I'll be speaking about character and being an illustrator and working with authors.
Excellent. And also?
I'm Melanie Polanyi. I write nonfiction, science fiction, and fantasy.
And I mentioned before, but I forgot to mention that I will be at with Brad R. Cook at the Big River Steampunk Festival in Hannibal over Labor Day weekend. Watch us clash swords as we talk about writing the fight scene. And no, we do not choreograph our fight scenes. They are actual sparring matches. We also, if you missed that one, we will be at Archon clashing lightsabers. Same type of presentation. Brad is also going to talk about steampunk and I think research as well, researching your novel. And I will be talking about Beyond the War of the Worlds, writing for radio plays. And today we also have a very special guest with us. This is recorded on his birthday. Happy birthday, George. And he's also a fan of Right Pack Radio.
Yes, my name is George Soroy. I write science fiction for the young adult reader. My first two books, Excelsior and the 5-part serial From Parts Unknown, are both available on Amazon. The first of two sequels to Excelsior, called Ever Upward, Part 2 of the Excelsior Journey, is currently in editing. And I also currently serve as the Vice President and Conference Chair of the Missouri Writers Guild.
Excellent. Okay, today's today's talk will be about the pros and cons of heroes and villains. I don't know about anyone else, and by the way, this is being recorded in front of a live audience, and they are more than amply welcome to participate. I don't know about anyone else around this room, but have you ever gone to college or gone to any of the writing courses and you've been told there are no such things as heroes and villains? Has anyone else been? I have been told this. I've got a couple of nods around the room. I thoroughly, myself, personally disagree. Now, it's a good idea to think in the terms of antagonist and protagonist, but there are such things, especially in real life, of villains. So let me ask this question: What do you think? Let's start off with heroes. What do you think defines the difference between a protagonist and a hero?
Really, it really just comes down to your actions. You can go in with like the best of intentions for anything, but it's going to be what was said perfectly in Batman Begins. It's what you do that defines you, and that's really what it comes down to in that end for me.
Well, the difference between a hero and a protagonist. The protagonist is the position the character plays in the story, like the story structure. The protagonist is the person that the camera is following. Whether that person is a hero or a villain, yes, George is absolutely right. It has to do a lot to do with how they behave and the decisions they make within the story. Not every protagonist is a hero. Not every hero is the protagonist. And it's important to note that some stories are told better from a point of view of someone who may not be the hero of the story. An example that Brad brought up at one of his talks was The Great Gatsby. The protagonist of The Great Gatsby is not Gatsby, but Gatsby's definitely the hero of the story. He's the one the story's about. He's the one that is trying to accomplish the goal. But the story's told better from Nick's point of view because he's an outsider looking in on that world. So, the difference between hero and protagonist.
So your protagonist is your point of view character?
Yes.
Can be.
Right.
Is the character that's going to go through the most struggle. In the case of Great Gatsby, Gatsby himself, I mean, the protagonist is going through trying to understand this world, basically. And he does, it's been a while since I've read the book versus the latest movie version of it, so I might end up crossing. But he's got to psychologically come to grips with what he's seen and what he's done, and as a part of Gatsby's world. But Gatsby is the one who's really become a self-made man in that story, and trying to win he's the one who's trying. Gatsby is the one who's trying to overcome, as far as in the world, and the protagonist is trying to overcome what he's witnessed in that world. If that makes any sense.
To tie protagonist to point of view one-to-one is difficult because there are so many different types of point of view. The protagonist of a third-person novel is not necessarily the point of view character if the novel is omniscient and it takes the point of view of lots of people. But the protagonist is what the story is about. So you're often, like in a first-person novel, the protagonist would be the point of view character because you're inside their head and they're who the story is about. That makes sense.
So Dr. Watson is a protagonist,
Yes.
while Sherlock Holmes is your hero.
Right.
Yeah.
Good example.
That's a perfect example. Anyone else looking up? Well, there's another form of hero as well, and that's the anti-hero. One of my favorite, the dirty, gritty, jagged-edged character. And he's the one, or she's the one, who will not act like a hero. So heroes tend to try to do the right thing. Anti-heroes will try to achieve the right goal, but they don't necessarily care about the means in which they use to get there. I would say, let me use an example. I'm going to borrow from one of Jen's favorite TV shows that I got her hooked on. Yes, I constantly...
You're so proud of yourself.
Yes, I am, especially at the level you've taken it. You've
He's
got
created a monster.
Yes, I have. But there's an episode of Babylon 5. If nobody has seen this is really good sci-fi. And I would recommend that you find it and watch it.
You might have to find it at the library because for whatever reason WB does not see fit to put it on Netflix or Hulu.
Yeah, I'm not happy with
The
them.
bitterness in the
It is a 5-year-long tale in which questions that opened up in the first season are being closed off in the 5th season. It's that tightly written. And there's an episode in which there's a character on the run from the government, if you will. And
One of the governments.
one of the governments. And, well, from the Earth government. And the chief of security goes undercover looking for him. And he finds the bad guys who have been basically kidnapped the person who's being looked for. And if you will, takes a gun, it's called a PPG, but takes a gun,
Keep it simple.
and fires off a round right next to the bad guy's head. And he goes, I'm very cranky right now. And I'm paraphrasing, I really don't have time for your BS. Tell me where this person's at. And fires off another round. And I think he does fire off a third, if I remember right. Anti-hero. You can't picture Superman wanting to do that to a character. He might hold the character and go, tell me what's going on. But Batman, use another anti-hero, will punch the wall right next to that guy's head. Or, as we saw in The Dark Knight, slam that guy's head into the table. So there are anti-heroes as well. What about villains? Go for it.
With villains, again, like it really comes down to their actions and how they go about accomplishing their own mission. One of the things that I really wanted to emphasize when I was writing From Parts Unknown was, since it takes place in the world, in a futuristic world, focusing on professional wrestling and like how it's evolved and everything, I used a line that one of the current Hall of Famer, Mick Foley, used a long time ago when he said, a bad guy, no matter what he does, he always believes that what he's doing is right. And it really just kind of, like I said before, it really comes down to your actions. What are you going to do to accomplish something that you feel you are entitled to? Who are you going to go through to make that happen?
One of the things that separates out, I think, an antagonist from a villain, an antagonist and a villain believe they're doing what's right. But I think it's how far they're willing to go to achieve their goal. How many people around the room, have seen Serenity? Okay, this is the movie from Firefly. And in there, the bad guy is a villain, and he knows it. There's a dialogue between Mal Reynolds, who is the anti-hero, and this bad guy whose name I can't think of right now. But Mal is saying, what, you're going to basically try and create this perfect world and live in it. And the villain goes, I can't live in it. I'm a monster. And he knows he's a monster. He has no problem killing off people and women and children to create this world that he's trying to make into something that's supposed to be the paradise.
Well, the same question sort of was presented. What's the difference between an antagonist and a villain?
Mm-hmm.
The antagonist's point, again, is the position in the story. The antagonist's position in the story is the one who's working against the goal of the protagonist.
Uh-huh.
And often that's not a hero. Perhaps that's a rival. Or that's not a villain. Perhaps it's a rival. Or perhaps it's a circumstance. Like all the different story structure tropes. Man versus society.
Uh-huh.
Man versus the machine. Those kind of things. Those are antagonists, but a villain is a person, is a character in the story. You can't say that the tornado in Twister is a villain.
Right.
The tornado in Twister is the antagonist. Well, it's an antagonistic element. There is an antagonist in that story. It's a rival storm chasing group.
Uh-huh.
They're all trying to get to the tornado, get the readings that they want, and be the first one to discover it. And is that rival technically a villain? Well, he doesn't. I don't remember the movie well enough to think. Does he sabotage things? Is he being? Does he take malicious action against our heroes? I don't remember hearing that.
Don't remember
Perhaps
either.
I think his biggest villainous thing was that he took money. He was funded by a company or something, I believe. It's been a long time since I've seen Twister. But
from my admittedly poor memory of the movie, I don't think he actually ever said he was a sellout, but didn't actually actively
so he
sabotage
wasn't-
the other guy.
he is a good example of someone who's maybe not a nice person, but I don't think he did anything villainous in that film, but he was still an antagonist.
It just literally popped into my head. The moment of Cary Elwes' character. He had basically taken the idea, like the original design, and then modified it just enough so that it would come off as his own.
Uh-huh.
That was the antagonist. That was the villainous move on his part.
Let me use a great. I was originally going to go with Call of the Wild from Jack London, which nature clearly is an antagonist in it. If you've never read the book, it's about a man, or read the story, it's about a man who's trying to survive in the wilderness. I forget if he's somewhere. He's in snow. I don't remember if he's up in Alaska or if he's down in the mountains area. But he's an idiot. Anybody who's trying to survive and starts a fire underneath a tree that's got snow on it, I'll tell you, as a Boy Scout and as an Eagle Scout, no, you don't do that. The snow is going to melt and put out your fire, and that's what happens there. And by the way, sidebar, there are two versions of that story, and he wrote it while he was in Hawaii, which I find hilarious. But what made me think about it beyond is, let me go into the movie world of Jurassic Park, as well as the books, the first book. You've got a villain in that book, and you've got antagonists. Now, the villain, spoiler alert, though this book's been out and the movie's been out for a long time, still spoiler alert, the villain dies pretty quickly in the book, and that is, I can't think of his name, but he's an IT guy who ends up stealing all these embryos from his employer to give to another rival company. And the embryos don't get out, but he gets killed by some dinosaurs. The antagonists are just trying to eat. They're the Tyrannosaur. They are the Velociraptors. they're attacking our protagonists all out throughout the story, but there's not a villainous aspect to it, unless you consider being lunch or dinner to be villainous. But from the point of view of that character, of the nature, they're not being villainous at all. So there's the separation.
You can think about Scarface or sort of mob movies in general as an example of something where the protagonist turns into a villain or occupies multiple roles at once. Like, it starts out as this sort of coming to America and trying to make it and figure it out, and then by the end of it, he has become the villain, and the antagonists are just the Colombians, and they have no goals aside from getting rid of this guy. And so it's kind of that quote, you either die a hero, live long enough to see yourself become the villain. So I just think it's interesting how much you can blend these lines and create. I think people like anti-heroes because they're inherently more complex than your typical just American World War II Patton, we're doing the right thing, even though Patton has some interesting things he does too. So that's kind of my thought.
Excellent. And you are?
I'm William Ward. I just moved here, working on a fantasy adventure novel.
Excellent. And welcome to St. Louis.
Oh, thank you.
And that's a perfect example of heroes versus the anti-hero. I'm glad. Anyone else? Yes.
I'm wondering if the line between hero and anti-hero is kind of thinning in our culture. My daughter wrote a paper about the protagonist in Breaking Bad and how he's this sort of modern day cowboy that disenfranchised white guys kind of want to be. And in our political environment, Trump is kind of like that. He's sort of this bad boy, but he's kind of a hero. And I'm wondering, I mean, clearly sort of anti, but I'm wondering if maybe the line is getting decreased in our culture.
I'm thinking if there's a response.
Want me to
Go for it.
The culture, like literature, like everything else, has trends, and trends in literature are often set in place by what's happening in our culture. So, I take superheroes for instance. Superheroes started off as a product of World War II. That America wanted to have heroes to defeat these big evil villains that we saw in our real life. To the point that the first issue of Captain America has him punching Hitler in the face. Like, that was what he was created for. Then, when the World War II, that sort of public concepts changed, so did the superheroes. The superheroes changed into we're tired of war, we're tired of fighting, and they became. Silver Age was that the goofy one? Yeah.
Yes, I think so.
Yeah, things became happy and sunny, and we didn't want to talk about dark things anymore.
But sometimes they got put into it. But yes, go ahead.
Then Bronze Age of comics got very dark because we were rebelling at the Bronze Age area. We were looking at like Vietnam and stuff, and people were tired of being told everything was okay when they knew it wasn't, and things got very dark. So the modern culture of today is absolutely shaping the way we see our heroes and our villains. Villains nowadays, if you notice, so often are big business types. They're so often corporations are the bad guy, and that's always been the case, it's true, but it's very popular nowadays in films to have the bad guy, and also, foreign terrorists are often the bad guys in stories, or double agents, a lot of international stuff like that, and heroes who are willing to do whatever it takes to get the job done are very popular because we're losing faith in police force, we're losing faith in military and in political leaders, just as a public culture. That's what we're being told by the media, that's what we're getting, and so for our escapist outlets, our entertainment outlets, we're heading toward places that we feel like we can take charge of those weaknesses that we see in our real life. So yeah, I would say absolutely that the anti-hero is becoming more popular nowadays because who we would consider our heroes are Captain America's. Even in the Captain America movie, he started off punching Hitler, and now his storyline has taken him off the grid. He's now no longer working for the government. He's now on his own and going rogue and doing what has to be done because all the red tape is keeping him from doing it. And that's how we as a nation kind of feel right now.
Mm-hmm.
So our heroes are taking that shape.
Is a perfect example of, well, first off, let me say, with just the superhero stories and so forth, that is, and a lot of our own stories, is mythology retold.
Mm-hmm.
We are still following the same mythos from Egypt, from Mesopotamia, Greece, Rome, China, Japan, you name wherever. And those stories are still have meaning today. It's a retell. But let me use an example exactly where you were going, Jennifer.
Mm-hmm.
How many around here saw Man of Steel? The last Superman movie before Batman vs Superman. Okay, I've got you're shaking your head no, which is good. Throughout my entire knowledge of Superman, and I'll admit I'm a Batman fan, I'm not a Superman fan. That's just I admit it. Don't throw stuff at my web walls, okay? But Superman has never killed, to my knowledge. Superman has always been the ultimate hero.
Yes.
Do everything right and risk everything to achieve the goal without crossing that line.
He's wearing primary colors for a reason.
Exactly. But in the Man of Steel, spoiler alert, he kills General Zod, breaks the guy's neck in order to save Metropolis. And I know a lot of fans of Superman went ballistic when they saw that, but that's exactly the case. He has evolved from that hero role with that kill to almost an anti-hero.
I don't know. I could have totally seen Christopher Reeves doing that to Terrence Stamp.
I could too. But,
Welcome, Brad, by the way.
Yes, Brad is being able to join in.
And you didn't get a chance to introduce yourself.
Go for it. Brad's a normal panelist.
Oh, okay, fine. Brad Arcook. I write stuff.
Yes. But yeah, you're right. But there's been a big change. Go ahead.
Well, first to add on to the Christopher Reeve part, he did pick up General Zod with one hand, threw him against the wall in his Fortress of Solitude, and just let him drop,
Yes.
into mist wherever he went. He didn't go, he didn't fly down and go pick him up and just say like, just kidding, and then put him down there. What the thing that I definitely need to defend regarding the choice that was made for Superman to do what he did at the end of Man of Steel was the result of a very long battle between he and Zod, and he was put in a position where he had no choice but to do that. And you can see as soon as he did that, he immediately agonized over his decision to do it. It was not just, doing what he did and then leaving. He was really just like down to the wire with that.
But the Superman story has changed to the point where that is the tale that was told.
Yes.
As opposed to previous Superman stories where very black and white, Lex Luthor is going to drop a continent on the earth and blow it up, and so our Christ figure needs to fly into the air and fix it. And it's a very easily drawn line there, as opposed to asking Superman, how close to the dark side are you willing to get to save people? That's usually a Batman line.
So he's
True.
been hanging out with Batman too much.
He's been hanging out with Batman too much.
Dang Justice League.
So, but that's a sign of our times. Is that when they were writing Man of Steel, they said a typical Christopher Reeve style Batman story isn't going to fly, pun intended, with our audience nowadays because they're expecting something darker, and it's because that's the culture we live in now. Although, if anyone had listened to a previous episode on Grimdark, we're getting kind of tired of the oversaturation of a grimdark kind of thing, which is why Man of Steel had such poor reception with so many people. It's because we're exhausted of being told that the world is terrible and everything's dark and your heroes are all villains. It worked for Batman because that's what Batman's character is. Batman's a lunatic. Let's just be honest here.
Right.
He's got a lot of darkness in him and probably should be talking to somebody about it.
But at the same time, you're also talking about a character who was doing the Batusi in the 1960s. So
Yeah,
it's just
yeah.
like,
Yeah.
again, like, you know, that's the beauty of all these different characters. You can take them in all these different directions, and at some point, they will just kind of snap back into place.
Yeah, it's I would like to say that our culture really wants to have someone to root for, and for me specifically, taking our superhero Superman character, who was always the Boy Scout, and taking him the darker place felt really felt a bit like a betrayal, like that one thing I had to believe in. Now that sounds really dramatic for Superman, but when I go to a Batman story, I'm ready to watch him struggle with his inner darkness. When I go to a Superman story, I'm ready to be championed, and I'm ready to be protected and saved. And it's kind of hard to see my hero fall like that when that is my expectation of him. And he's done that before in comics. He's definitely done that before. He died once.
Yes.
He came
I'm
back.
hoping that this will eventually kind of lead him to that journey where he can become that shining champion that we all know and love.
We'll see
Hopefully
how the box office does.
We'll see.
This relates to the conversation and the movie, so I'll bring it up here in a second. But
Steers
General
back, of course,
Zod,
now.
I thought was really wasted in that movie because instantly he was the irredeemable bad guy from the beginning, and there was so much room to make him sympathetic and make him have more than one dimension. And he came in saying, I'm going to destroy the world. This is what I'm going to do. I'm not even pretending to be anything else. But, he could have tried to befriend Superman, say, I was your father's best friend. I want to recreate Krypton. Together, we can make things great. And then Superman could be betrayed when he realizes the truth. But they didn't choose to go that way.
So in a world where our heroes flirt with villains, it would have been more appropriate for our villain to become sympathetic and flirt with being a hero.
Well, not
If
even...
we're blurring the lines here, then
Well, just
it
to
felt
see
uneven.
see his side of it. Not everybody's a hero of their own story. He's still the villain as far as Earth is concerned, and he never stops being the villain as far as Earth is concerned. But from his point of view, he had legitimate grievances that led to Krypton's destruction, and he had a goal, and from his point of view, he was the hero.
I'm going to derail us a little bit, but I'm going to talk about a little
Probably.
more anti-hero. There's by the way, FYI, look at Private Eye stories if you want other anti-heroes, especially in 1930s through modern day. Dashiell Hammett, especially. Lots of PIs, and he was a PI in real life, so a lot of his stories are pretty real. But one of the first anti-heroes I can think of that we have in literature is Lancelot, all the way back to King Arthur. Now, most of us know the story of Lancelot through the writings of Alfred Lord Tennyson, not so much the older writings. But as we know of Lancelot was the best of his knights of King Arthur. He also was sleeping with the queen. Big problem. He was also was a love him and leave him type of guy if it wasn't the queen, and would cause suicides and so forth and so forth. Clearly an anti-hero, but yet a member of a very strong, heroic, let's call it Justice League, lack of a better way of saying, they get back to the comic books. Mythology is filled with anti-heroes as well. This is a constant repeat. So where I'm going with this is, how do you create heroes and anti-heroes? And then I'm going to talk about how to create villains versus antagonists. And I'm going to mention something about that when we get to there. So, first off, who here writes hero stories? Okay, got a couple.
Sure.
Couple, okay. How do you go about creating your hero? Whoever wants to first throw up. No pun intended with heroes. Sorry, that was Freudian. Okay.
I guess I'll go first. My particular journey to creating this particular character will go with Excelsior. He was somebody who was directly inspired by King Arthur. When I first saw the 1981 movie Excalibur, that was featured in Batman v Superman. To get to that, so basically, what I wanted to do is I wanted to create like a mythic type of figure. I combined elements of Arthur, Jesus Christ, and my childhood hero Optimus Prime, and basically made him into one of the collective of gods who are responsible for the creation of the universe. His whole thing is that he had basically taken too long creating this jewel of a planet, to a point where he was putting so much pride into it that he felt the pride building up into him, and suppressed his pride so much that it actually broke off and created its own entity, which would become his antagonist, which we're going to meet quite a bit in Ever Upward, the sequel. So it was really just a matter of kind of taking that character and seeing how he would be in the limiting form of a human. And then throughout the story, we see that his life force has been passed on to different people. So it's basically like what that particular person kind of makes of having that kind of power.
Anyone else? Thank you. Yes.
Yeah, going off that, I always try to think of why specifically is this person suited to solve this problem that the story's presenting, which I guess goes along with why now, why today, which is why you start as soon as the action is portended to start. Like Tolkien, if you look at Tolkien, he has the Lost Tales, which builds the entire world of whatever the first 7,000 years before The Hobbit happens. It leads into the Lord of the Rings, But he built everything else around so that his world seems so rich and exciting. But hobbits are specifically designed for what they need to do. They're thieves, so they can move without being seen. They're very small. They can get through these places they're supposed to go. And then in a more traditional story, is this person, do they have a lot of perseverance? Are they very believable and very trustworthy? What are the specific traits about this person that make them perfect? But also, what are their flaws that make them interesting and relatable? So that's what I try to get to when I'm creating here. And it takes a lot of time, and character work is very important to me. It's more important than plotting for me. So.
Oh. Anyone else? Thank you. Okay. I don't write hero stories. I write anti-hero stories. And that's where I'm going to go next. Is we know an anti-hero is definitely more jagged than a hero. The current one I'm working on right now, the story is called The Kairin. And I borrowed Japanese mythology. I really hated this movie, especially for its depiction of this creature. It is a Kairin. But how many of you saw the 47 Ronin with Keanu Reeves?
47 Ronin?
47.
Ronin.
Yeah, Ronin. I mispronounced. Even though I studied Japanese. Oh well. It's a horrible, I really hate that picture. But if you remember the ugly creature that the samurai kill at the very beginning, kind of looks like it has antlers and bug eyes and all that, that's a Kairin. Why I hated them killing this is because of a couple reasons. The creature in mythology, or Shintoism, is, think of a dragon mixed with a unicorn. The unicorn aspect protects life, destroys evil with its horns. However, it is more powerful than a dragon. It is very ugly, but if you see it, it's supposed to be a good luck. So a samurai killing it is just like Batman killing Superman for no reason. Just, no, you don't do this. But I take heroic ideas and I go, okay, this will not work in real life. How do I change this heroic idea and change it to an anti-hero? How far on the edge will they go, and how far will they be willing to go into the world of villainy in order to achieve the heroic aspect of the story? So my character, I'll give it away, is a modern-day female shinobi or ninja. And yes, I've got lots of martial art background I'm borrowing from, who is getting trained by her grandmother by videotape, because her grandmother's dead and her dad wanted nothing to do with her culture. So there's a lot of aspects there, but she's trying to figure out, the story begins with the suicide or apparent suicide of her father. And she knows he didn't commit suicide. So she's got to figure out what really happened. And she's got this whole dark side. Because walking down that martial art, you go into a dark side of yourself. So it takes the idea of a Kairin, which is supposed to be a good creature, chasing away evil. Well, if you're chasing away evil, how dark do you have to go to stay and still stay good? That's what I do. Anyone else write anti-heroes?
I'm kind of a little mixture of both.
Okay.
I have one main hero leading a team of anti-heroes. So he's drawing a line between himself and them, but also the villains of the story. So it makes for a lot of soul searching on the part of the character. How far is he willing to go to protect his own people while fighting off the bad guys? Well, that, I guess partly it's fun to write the villains. So I wonder how much. So I kind of think maybe the anti-heroes is kind of our way to kind of merge the middle a little bit and get in there.
I'd go with that.
A little fun.
One of my characters, he goes from hero to anti-hero. While he was in the Rangers, obviously he's got rules of engagement and so forth. He's put into a situation where he no longer has to follow those rules, and in order to achieve what he needs to achieve, he abandons some of those and kind of goes into a much darker part of where he never thought he would have to go.
Cool. Anyone else?
I have
for
a
it.
question.
Uh-huh.
If a good character is a full well-rounded character is flawed,
Mm-hmm.
then aren't almost all heroes to some degree anti-heroes? Or am I misunderstanding what you mean by an anti-hero?
I'm going to answer that with saying depends on the flaw. Let me use which I can't remember the detective's name. I'm going to shoot myself for that. But the Maltese Falcon.
Oh, Sam Spade.
Thank you.
Yes.
Sam Spade in that story is sleeping with his partner's wife, giving her up, committing adultery. He is hiding things from the police. Has no problem shooting somebody. So his flaws there are womanizing, doesn't trust issues, and so forth. Does that make him good? Questionable. If you got a character flaw, let's say you got a character flaw of egotism and egotistic narcissism and alcohol abuse. Well, Iron Man is a good guy, generally speaking. You can call him an anti-hero, but he's really a good guy with flaws. I mean, take a look at the Civil War, the movie that came out. He's trying to do the right thing. He's trying to follow the government's rules, and that's what breaks him and Captain America's side apart. So he actually takes on the role of being a hero, even though he's got his own flaws. So I think it's a question of where those flaws are and what they're doing to the character and how far they're willing to go on the dark side. Star Wars, Luke Skywalker. Luke Skywalker is a hero. What's his flaws? Well, he doesn't have self-confidence at first. He's inexperienced. He's very naive. And he has to go on this journey. And if you watch cinematically how his costuming changes throughout the story. He goes from white and light browns to black. And you see him going into darkness. But he comes out of it still as a hero, despite his flaws. Now, I'm not talking about the expanded universe. I know what happens there, and that's not...
It doesn't
no
count
longer
anymore.
canon
Anyway.
Right. But let's take a look at Han Solo. Han Solo is technically not a hero. He's an anti-hero. He has no problem shooting down bad guys. In fact, despite the re-release of the Star Wars Episode 4 that came out with George Lucas's changes, Han shot Greedo first. Mm-hmm. He did not wait for the shot to be fired. He had no trouble. And if you note, he didn't pull the gun and shoot above the table. He shot the guy from underneath the table. That's not heroic. Heroic is, I'll take a gun and take it across the table, or at least do a fair draw. Go ahead.
That's a great example, because that was why George Lucas changed it to have Greedo fire a shot and then have Han fire in self-defense. It's because it changed him from becoming an anti-hero to a hero. To react in a dark way to a bad thing is heroic. To step up and do a dark thing is anti-heroic.
I would go with that.
Han is an anti-hero because he's walking the other side of the law. He's doing good stuff, but he also has selfish ideals in mind. He wants the money. At the end of the first Star Wars movie, which at the time it was made was all they had, you know, you can't look at him in terms of the whole broad whatever. In just Star Wars A New Hope, the first movie, we didn't know if he was going to come back to help us fight the bad guy at the end. When he came back, we all went, oh, he was good after all. Oh, we're so glad. I liked him. I'm allowed to like him now because he's not that jerk I thought he was, because he's an anti-hero because he's riding the line. As opposed to Luke, who we all know is the hero. We expect him to do the right thing. He might have some flaws to him. He's got his own complexity. He's not a simple cardboard character, but he's the hero, and we know he's the hero. You know, even if he does some bad stuff, we're not going to expect him to be Han Solo level of ride the line.
George, and then we'll go into villains and antagonists.
There's just one little thing I do want to just give Lucas credit for. He kept in the one little shot of Han Solo actually taking his blaster out of his holster while saying, "Even I get bored at sometimes. You think I had any choice?" So even though in the newer versions of the of A New Hope, Han was at least preparing himself to shoot first.
Well, he didn't want to completely crucify his character.
Right. Yeah. Thankfully. Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
Okay. I don't know what's happening with the new version or whatever you guys are talking about, but if Greedo did shoot him first, and if Han was a hero, I don't think Han would have shot back. I think, he might have tried to take him down. I don't think Superman, being the hero that he is, I don't think he would have tried to kill Greedo, even if Greedo did try to kill Han. Either way, Han is still the anti-hero because he did kill Greedo.
That's a good point, because he was willing to take it that far to go ahead and kill. Yeah, that's a huge step.
Any other hero wouldn't have killed Greedo, even though Greedo tried to kill Han. But Han, being the person he is, and the anti-hero, he had to kill Greedo.
Good point. I like that.
But unless he could find a way to disarm Greedo,
yeah,
one of them was going to die.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's very few people who can shoot like the Lone Ranger. I mean, come on, shoot the gun right out of the guy's hand.
But one thing he could have done, I mean, he could have shot him in the shoulder. He could have shot him in the hand, the leg. He didn't have to kill him.
Since it was fiction.
Yeah. I mean, you don't have to shoot to kill. You just have to shoot.
Well, apparently Greedo couldn't even hit Hans at point blank range, so maybe he
stormtroopers can't hit anything. No villain in Star Wars can hit anything.
Oh, good. I do want to switch over now to antagonists versus villains. My personal perception is one of the things we know. Bad guy is bad guy. And you can take a villain and take it all the way down to serial killers or whatever. They exist in real life, they exist in fiction. But I think one of the big differences between an antagonist and a villain is an antagonist is somebody who is in competition or has a plan against the protagonist in achieving whatever. So let's say George and I, we are both wanting the same pot of gold. I'm trying to get a loan to get the pot of gold. He's robbing the bank. Okay, and that's not like he's a villain, but he's not. He's trying to get the money. He's trying to steal the money. Villainous, not necessarily. Or maybe he's got some type of idea that once I get the gold, he's going to take over my company and steal my house from me as a corporation because it's sitting on top of a gold mine. Villains, I think, especially the best of villains, are not only willing to go dark and have no problem going dark, they're reflections of a hero. Okay, I'm going to jump into Batman, one of my favorites, not my only, but Batman. Villain. Let's take a look at his rogues gallery. You've got the Joker. Batman is law and order, even though you can question how lawful he is. He's
Batman's
a vigilant.
control.
Yeah, he's control. He's a vigilante, but he's control. Joker's all about chaos. Penguin is about wealth and the dark side of wealth. Bruce Wayne is the good side of wealth and being able to do more philanthropy. Riddler. Riddler is the reflection of Batman's detective side. How can you move, solve these puzzles? He's constantly trying to solve puzzles. I think the Riddler is just trying to make Batman better. And that's something else too. The villain actually, in a lot of ways, is trying to make the hero the better hero in the story. Bane. Who else can you think of can break Batman's back? Bane is the physical dark side of Batman's physical confrontation. Go ahead.
I just have to say this. This is going against the villains and the characters. Without the villains, the characters wouldn't be anything. So without the Riddler, I don't think Batman could be as good as a detective as he was now. If the villain isn't any good, then the character isn't any good. He doesn't have any skill. He doesn't have any talent almost.
Agreed.
There are stories that don't have villains in
Yes,
them.
there are.
You don't need a villain to have a strong character,
No.
but you need a challenge.
Which
And
the
a
antagonist
villain,
gives. Right.
You know, as you've just described all of Batman's villains, which I wanted to add that Mr. Freeze is the losing of the loved one.
Mm-hmm.
I love Mr. Freeze, but the using your villain to highlight your hero's worst elements is always the challenge of overcoming. So Batman is overcoming these elements that you've mentioned in himself as he's fighting the Rogues Gallery. When he's staring at the Joker is asking him, "Don't you belong in Arkham Asylum with the rest of us?" And he's got to face the fact that, yeah, he probably does, but he's using it the best he can. And that kind of a thing. The villain, the story is about the hero, about the protagonist, and the antagonist is there to make the story have weight and have depth and have personality that then we as the reader can take part of. We can see in ourselves, or at least we can understand how it works. That's the big thing about the villains. A villain that shows up and, wah ha 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 ha, cackles,
Twists
his mustache, and doesn't have any motivation. Well, most people don't understand why people do horrible things. We live in a world where horrible things happen all the time. And we are always trying to figure out why, or who did it, what was the reason. And as a reader, we want that in our villain, because that makes us we want to understand the villain so we can then understand why we need to stop him, or maybe why we need to reform him, her, them. It's all about creating a strong character that doesn't necessarily always have to be sympathetic. I mean, it could be a madman, but you see why he became a madman, and you understand that that's why he needs to be stopped.
Mm-hmm.
That kind of thing. Whatever is going to be the best opposing force to your hero, to your protagonist, that is your villain or your antagonist.
So much of what you said and so much of what David said before, that's a really big reason why The Dark Knight is as strong a movie as it is, because even though, the second half of the third act kind of, tails off a little bit, the overall relationship between Batman, the Joker, and Harvey Dent is so strong, and it's so so captivating that you have to keep watching it. And a really smart move of Christopher Nolan when creating this new version of the Joker for us is by basically borrowing from elements of the DC Comics character by not giving us a full clear origin for him. You get to see like an origin of a villainous character through Harvey Dent, but it's basically like used as almost like a tug of war between those two characters, because the Joker is basically, he exists because Batman exists. And also, just for the record, I'm really a nice guy. I would not steal from David, so.
Go ahead.
I think the villain really brings out what the hero has to offer. If you don't have, I said this before and I say it again, if you don't have a good villain, then you don't have a good hero. And the villain really needs to be well written or well told. You need to have that side of the villain. You need to also have his story told as long with the hero to make a good story. I mean, Star Wars has that, Harry Potter has that. I mean, you know the dark side of Voldemort, you know all of that. You know why the villain is doing what he's doing. And you really need that if you want to bring out not only what the villain has to offer, but what the hero has to offer.
I guess my question is, in terms of villains, are there any rules that apply to the villain? It seems like they're allowed to go as dark as they want to, but are there certain, at least for novels, are there certain rules that must apply to villains?
Go as dark as your genre allows you to.
Yeah.
You have to keep in
And
mind who your audience is.
that's a really good point, because in mysteries, which deal often with murders, don't ever kill a dog on site, on proverbial camera. So your villain could kick the dog, don't kill it.
Same thing with cats and any cute animal to a lesser degree, but especially cats and dogs for
children.
American audience.
Excellent.
No, you can abuse kids, but you have to make sure of your audience
In your
Right.
book.
in your book.
And how dark you go. And how dark you go.
I'm sitting right here.
Well, I will say, though, that's rule number one. Rule number two, how to create a believable villain. And I'm going to say, this is what I do. I've studied this quite a lot. Take Jungian myth archetypes, and also read a lot by. Now, this mind just went out of my head. It's one that John Douglas, one of the first profilers, FBI profilers as we call them. They're really behavioral detectives. He wrote a bunch of books, for example, Obsession, which looks at the serial, not so much the serial killer, but all the serial offenders, serial rapists, serial stalkers, and so forth, and get into the darker side of psychology and try to understand where that's coming from. The archetypes have always got back to Jung. The archetypes always have a dark side to them, and that's where you're going to dip into, and that's one of the best ways I think of to make that villain. And from that villain, you can make the hero. Okay. Then you.
There was a great line actually in the DC Comics documentary called Necessary Evil, which
Yes.
explores the villains of the DC Comics universe. The line that they give themselves around the office is, the good guy has to win every time, the bad guy only has to win once.
Yes.
I recommend marrying a narcissist sociopath for creating. It's not for everyone.
Way to go.
Yes.
Yeah, I had
It's
an
on the
interest.
ground reporting.
All right, deep cover
Yeah.
investigations. What I'm finding really interesting, I finished my first novel, and it's out with some agents and an editor. So fingers crossed, everybody. But I have a major villain, and a minor villain, a best friend character who's actually, gone off the rails. But I found myself so fascinated with her that she is now the protagonist in my second novel, and kind of exploring that backstory about why she was this villainous character. So it can be really interesting and kind of in going into the psychological depths of these people and seeing where you go.
Another example of doing that I'm going to turn over to this gentleman over here. Anne Rice, with Interview with the Vampire and then the Vampire Lestat. Where Lestat is I'm going to call him the villain. He's really not an antagonist. but he's the villain in Interview with a Vampire, and then he becomes the hero with Vampire Lestat and all the following ones that he's in. So
I think one rule that you have to follow is you want to write for your age group. If you're writing for young readers, don't put Stephen King stuff in there. That's just it's gonna scare them. That's gonna be really bad. You want to, if you're writing for what do you write for? Do you write for young adults or
Adults.
okay? So you don't want to put something in there that's not scary enough. If you're trying to like write horror or something, you want to put something in there that's scary enough to entertain them, but not too scary.
Yeah.
That's okay.
It's all about what your story calls for.
right.
If you're writing a dark story, like a mystery or something that requires heavy stakes, then yeah, writing for adults, if you want it to be dark as possible, you go for it. I'm going to caution you, this is just me speaking from a woman's point of view. If someone who's aware of media, going straight for the rape card is a little bit of a low blow. Things can happen to people that are not rape. Murders happen, yeah, but so many female characters or even male characters are motivated by the raping of a woman, and it's a trope that I would really like to see done less, because it's such a low blow. It's such a violation of a woman's body, and men get raped too, but they never get raped in media for some reason. It's always the ladies that are taken to the vulnerable place and are tormented physically and emotionally for the benefit of someone's story. And so often women are written to not have strength until something like that happens to them, which is entirely not fair, because women have strength in themselves. To get back to sort of your question, what is, how dark can you get? If you're writing a romantic comedy and you throw a rape scene in there suddenly, your audience is going to go, whoa!
Yeah, that's called really jumping the rails or jumping the shark.
That would be inappropriate in that sense, even though it is an adult story. Even though maybe there's sex in the story, it just goes a little bit too dark for the subject matter that you're looking at. If you take YA, so often the villainous act of a YA is spreading a bad rumor about somebody. In a YA story, that's the worst thing that could possibly happen, is that I fall out of public favor in my high school. Or your boyfriend cheats on you. That's horrible. Most people would say that if your boyfriend cheats on you, well, at least he didn't murder you. That's true, but in the book I'm writing, him cheating on me is the worst thing that has happened to me in my entire life. And that has the appropriate weight for that story you're writing. And as a villain, him cheating could make him the most detestable thing in the story, because that's what matters to your protagonist. That's the emotional weight, the emotional stake of the story, based on how the protagonist sees it in that instance. So that's kind of the point I'm making, I guess.
Yep. By the way, sidebar: don't fridge your characters. If you
Don't
don't know my
fridge
term,
people.
you don't
Women in
understand that.
refrigerators.
Yeah. What was it? Say it again.
Women in refrigerators.
Yep.
It's the trope in which you take a vulnerable character and you do terrible things to them to motivate your generally male protagonist story.
Yeah.
So anytime the example that Women in Refrigerators comes actually from a Green Lantern comic book. The Green Lantern, he didn't have any motivation of his own for this particular story until he came home and saw his girlfriend dismembered in the fridge. And that was the motivation. Did she have a character? Not really. She was just there to be mutilated so that he would have something to fight for. And that's cheap, and that's a trope.
And
Yeah.
I will say, this isn't a major spoiler, but minor spoiler alert, the Killing Joke, Batman, in the comic book, Batgirl is fridged. In the movie, they made some changes. They actually put a good deal of the story from Batgirl's point of view, so I don't think she's fridged anymore. Although about the same thing happens.
Yeah.
And not only women get fridged, often homosexual men get fridged because they are considered a quote-unquote weaker stereotype. Any kind of lover of a main character tends to get fridged. That goes with killing the dog, killing the cat.
Yeah.
Someone that, it's like, if your only motivation was to attack, and I'm not saying that all instances of that are bad. Like, there are definitely situations where the only way to get to these guys is to attack their family, and that's the bad thing. But the motivation of the villain to attack the family member, establish something so that you understand why that happened. Be a little bit more complex than going for the gut shot to start with. Punch him straight in the kidney, and the audience is like, what? Wait, who was that person? Why did that happen? And then what has happened to your hero? It just has been said many times, that when the villain takes the slow blow, takes a cheap shot, and we don't understand why, then we don't understand why the hero deserved that on the villain's side. We don't understand how the hero is supposed to respond to it, other than, blind rage or something, and everyone gets very shallow when that stuff happens. We don't have any room to understand and project ourselves onto them.
And I'm going to turn this over to you, and then that'll be the end of this episode, but a good example, modern, really just recently made and released movie where the fridged woman is the motivator is, how many of you saw Equalizer with Denzel Washington? The female who is a prostitute, who is a friend of Robert, gets beaten up by the pimp, and that actually sends him off on his journey. Now, it's not just an easy, boom, okay, I'm going to go out and rage. The character does quite a bit of soul searching before he does it, but that is another example.
Kind of going off of what you guys are saying about motivation, you want there to be a connection between the villain and the character.
Mm-hmm.
If all of a sudden the story, the villain pops up, hero's there, takes him out, and the story's done, there's nothing there. There's no motivation. There is no real connection. It doesn't make it interesting. You want there to be a connection between the hero and the villain. Like if the hero has a best friend that turns into a villain, it would not only make it interesting, but make it a connection, and thus making it a whole lot more interesting story. I would read a story where the villain and the character are connected, and I wouldn't read a story where they're not connected. I just think it would be bland if they weren't. So.
Mm-hmm. Any final thoughts? If not, in that case, tune in next week for yet another interesting tale in the writing industry, and have a great week writing. Thank you. One thing we forgot to tell you before this ended is that George has got a drawing for a free book, and we are now going to announce who that winner is.
Yes, this drawing is made up of participants over at Writers in the Park who sat in at the presentation that both myself and T.W. Fenley did. Who's also, from what I understand, a Right Back member. The prize is not only a free audiobook of my novel Excelsior, but also a free audiobook of T.W. Fenley's novel The Labyrinth of Time. So,
and survey says
the winner is Mr. Steve Langhorse. Steve Langhorse, we are going to be sending your copy of both The Labyrinth of Time and Excelsior. You'll be getting Audible codes for both of those. You should be getting those by the time this airs. You should have them by now. If you have not, then there's a real problem. So
contact me, and I'll get with George. Have a good one. Have you ever written an audio play? Have you even considered writing one? Visit www.windingtrailsmedia.com because currently we are looking for audio plays to produce. Again, that is www.windingtrailsmedia.com and visit Calls for Scripts. And while you're at it, please sign up for the newsletter, and you will find that icon at the bottom of every page. The new theme songs for Right Pack Radio were written and performed by Meredith Tate. All copyrights remain with her.